Hello all, I'm Will from Hitmarker. You might have seen me in such hits as the other two masterclasses we did. So what we're going to be doing today is I'll give it a couple of minutes before I actually get going with the content, just so that everyone can filter in who's going to find this on Twitter or on stages. But we are going to be talking about job interviews today, which is something that I think is the most requested thing I get from our community. A lot of people message me and ask about job interviews, what they should be doing, what kind of questions they should be asking, a bunch of other things about the whole process, right? So what we're going to be doing today is I've taken a lot of what the community has asked, and we've written some of our hottest tips that you should be looking at for job interviews and how you should be preparing for them primarily. What you should be considering yourself before you go into a job interview, how you should be conducting yourself within the interview, and then of course the all-important, when you're asked, do you have any questions, what kind of questions you should be asking there, what kind of stuff should you be preparing, and how should you go about doing that. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, and we'll be asking some of our most frequently asked questions on the topic as well. So things should be quite a good one. We're going to try and keep it to an hour once again. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And as always with these masterclasses, this is kind of designed to not only tell you what you should be doing, but also why you should be doing it, right? There's not that much point in us saying, this is a question you should ask, and then just leaving it there, because you can find that information online in lots of different places. But it's the understanding and the ability to reason why this stuff is good, because then you can adapt and you can use that information in further interviews in different ways. If you have any questions as we go on through the talk, we've got admin in. You can either drop your questions in text in general chat. That is where we're going to be having our admin's eyes, and they will drop me any questions that are posted in there, and I'll try and answer those. If you have any questions, you can also raise your hand, and we can jump to you and see if we've got a good answer for you. Okay. I'm just going to have a quick sip of my water, and then we'll get going with the first section. Amazing. Right. Job interviews, eh? So, if you've been following the story so far with the Hitmarker Masterclasses, you should already have a very, very good resume, a very, very good cover letter. And in doing so, we'll probably be invited for an interview if you've got the experience to match the role that you're applying for. Now it's a case of you've received that email usually, or a message from the hiring manager saying, hey, thank you for applying for this role. We'd like to set up an interview with you. We'd like to take you forward to the next stage of the application. Of course, within esports, there might be other stages of application between initial and interview, but because those are so specific and niche and not every application has one, that's not something that we'll be going into too strictly today. That being said, if that's something that you want advice on, you can let us know on our Discord, and we can consider putting on an event about those extra steps in a job application process. But for now, let's just assume that you've done your resume, you've done your cover letter, you sent those off, and this is where you found yourself to your interview. Hopefully this interview will have been set up a decent amount in advance, because now you've got a little bit of time to prepare yourself, a little bit of time to think about the important stuff, get yourself ready and fully prepped. And so when you walk into that interview and you shake the hand of the person, or when you log on to that Zoom call, other cool software is available, you'll be so ready for the interview that nothing's going to catch you off guard, really, right? Because that's the dream. You want to go into an interview and know pretty much exactly what they're going to go for, what you should be looking out for, and you should be ready to take on any challenge that comes across the table to you. So, how are you preparing? What are you doing? Well, the first thing that you should be doing, or one of the first things you should be doing, is making sure to research the company and their competition. And this is kind of you should have done this already, but this is a slightly different angle. So when you were writing your cover letter and your resume, specifically cover letter for this, You should have researched the company you're applying to, because you want to have tailored your application to them. You want to have impressed them with your knowledge of the company and potentially even the competition or the area that they work in, right? So if you're applying for an esports organization that is primarily in League of Legends, you should know a good amount about that company before this stage, because you should have mentioned it in your cover letter. And you might also know about the League of Legends ecosystem as a whole. You might also know about some of their competitors more specifically. So you should already have a decent baseline level, but a couple of things may or should change in the way that you're going about this. So time will have passed since you did your initial application. I think it's unlikely that you get the interview the same day that you send off your cover letter and CV, unless the hiring manager is super on the ball, in which case, amazing, great stuff from that hiring manager, but I think that's a very, very unlikely set of circumstances. So things may have changed, and it will be very impressive to an interviewer if you sit down and you can talk about, if they ask you questions about what you think about their company, you can say, well, when I was making my initial application, this and this and this impressed me, but since then, since I sent in my resume and cover letter, you've also started this project, or this news has come out, which really intrigues me. It shows that you're still actively following the company, and it's something that a lot of people that I've spoken to, and I did this myself when I first started in my own job hunt journey, was I would do a bit of preparation, a bit of research on the company, and I think the research for my cover letter and stuff would generally be pretty good. But then I would kind of just rest on that and be like, I already know what this company is about because I've already looked at them. And if that means if anything has changed since then, you're going to be caught off guard by it. And while that's not going to likely be major, so a company may not expect you 9 times out of 10 to know exactly the last piece of news, or the last piece of news might have been something that isn't that recent, so you will have that knowledge already. If a company, the day before your interview, launches a huge new product, moves into a different game, releases a game title, announces their next game, this is stuff that you have to know, not only for their company, but for competition. Because interviewers love discussing what value and learning what value you bring to the company and why they should be hiring you to improve them. And one thing that companies do is they're in competition with each other. So if you're applying for an esports organization, they might want to say, well, what can you bring to the table? That's a classic question of how are you going to improve the company? What skills are you bringing, kind of thing. And if you can look at the competition and say like, wow, this is something that the competition's doing really well. This is a skill that I have, which this organization needs a little bit more of. That's good because it shows awareness of the competition around the sector. As some interviewers might even specifically just ask, what do you think of this sector that we're in? What do you think of our main competition? What's your analysis? So doing some analysis on the company that you're applying for versus their main competition, even if it's not every single other team in the space, every single other developer in the space, just knowing their biggest competitors and understanding, well, obviously the company that you're reviewing for is doing really well because of X, Y, and Z. I looked at some competition, and while you're beating them in several key areas, like this, and this, I think that there is room for growth in this area. And I think there are lessons that can be learned from this project that another company's doing. And not necessarily saying we should do the same thing, but this sparked this idea in me. And having that kind of knowledge and having that kind of ability to, on the fly, pull that stuff out, even if it's a case of like writing this stuff down and taking it to your interview with you, even if you don't use it, if it's in person, the interviewer will probably see it and they'll be like, this person's done their prep. That's good. Or if you're online, just having it available if you need it means that you're prepared. And if you're prepared, you're going to be more confident and more comfortable. And this is all just great information that has been asked before in interviews that I've been in. I've heard people asked specifically to do this kind of competition analysis in their interviews. Sometimes there might be a presentation on a similar topic, but again, we're just talking strictly about interviews today because not every company does presentations as part of the application process. And you want to have this section nailed because it's very obvious if you don't know what you're talking about when you're talking to an interviewer about their company, the company that they work for. If you haven't got an answer for them, that's one of those, oh, this person hasn't bothered to do their research. They're not the right person for this company. And it's a super easy way that interviewers use to weed out candidates that don't really care or haven't done the research or don't understand their company. And if you've already taken the time to make a cover letter and a resume, you could take the time to do some analysis on like 4 companies, 1 that you're applying for and 3 that are in the same area, that are the biggest competition. So that's one of the things that you should be doing, is looking through that. And again, if you want ways of doing that, searching it on Google, the company and their competition, and using the news feature on Google. I still don't understand how this is not like a bigger thing that people talk about when they're talking about research, but it aggregates a lot of different news stories and events. And when it comes to applying for something like in esports or video games, big game releases, big project starts are going to be listed under news where sites have picked them up. And as more and more esports and video game specific publications come out, it's much easier to find that stuff. Also, checking out their website, the social media of the companies that you're looking at, always a good avenue as well. So that's quite an easy one. And it's something that you can do. It's a bit time consuming is the drawback of this tactic, or the drawback of doing this. But if your complaint is preparing for this interview is taking too much time, imagine the amount of time that you've already spent on the application to get a CV and a resume, a CV and a cover letter written. Anytime that you're like, I can't really be bothered, or I don't really have time for this, is you're just wasting your time. You've wasted all the time you put into the application at this point. And you're going to have to spend more time in the future applying for more jobs if you don't get this one. So putting in as much time as you possibly can, or putting in the required effort, is super crucial for a job application. I've got a frozen bottle of water, but I left it in the freezer too long. So it's just one big block of ice. So I have to like wait for it to melt a little bit and then I can drink. So I'm just going to do it point by point. The next thing that you have to do, and we said this time and time again, and we'll continue saying it at every stage of an application, go back to the job listing and read it again. And something that we think is probably worth doing, and something that we haven't mentioned before, but is kind of a secret top tip. Once you've applied for a job with it and you've seen a job listing, save that job listing. And I don't just mean bookmark the page, although you should be doing that. Copy and paste that job listing somewhere, because if the company decides that they're going to close the job listing because they found their shortlist of candidates, you being one of them if you're going to be interviewed, you still want to be able to utilize this, what they've written and the description and the skills they ask for and the stuff that they need and what you're going to be doing. You want to be able to have access to this, and you might not be able to just go and easily find it on Hitmarker or go and easily find it somewhere else. On Hitmarker, it'll be easier to find than if you apply for it elsewhere. So you should really be using our platform. But general advice, I like the copy paste. Also means that you can print out and doodle on it or like make notes on it and take it with you physically. It means that you can highlight stuff on it on a second monitor or on Word or Docs. And it just makes your ideas a little bit easier to compartmentalize. But I guess the thing is, when you've got that saved and or if you've got access to it online, what are you doing with the job listing now that you've got that interview? Because clearly you understood the job listing to an extent, or at least you as a candidate cover what they want from the job, because they've taken you to interview. And it's a very rare occasion that companies take someone to interview they don't think is qualified for the job. It does happen, but it's pretty rare. So what you want to be looking here is reading through, much as you would with a resume and cover letter, and understand, A, where do your strengths lie and how you can prove that, and B, where are your weaknesses in what they ask for, and what is the conversation around that going to be if it comes up. So let's say you're applying for a social media manager role with an esports organization, and you're really great with Twitter. You've got some basic video editing and Photoshop skills, which is something that they ask for as like an extra would be nice. You've got a bit of social media manager experience, and you've got obviously in your resume and cover letter, you've mentioned why you proved this stuff, right? Especially in the cover letter, you've proved that you've got all of these skills. It's still good just to have a look through and be like, well, it asks on the job description to have experience with Twitter. I've managed these Twitter accounts in the past, blah, blah, blah. They've got this many followers. They gained this many percentage when I was there. All of this stuff. A lot of that can be done via your cover letter because information about you and your personal achievements are much less likely to change than a company's information is. And you don't have to research yourself too much because you're living your life. So, you know, it's unlikely that something is going to change drastically in your life without you noticing. So just looking through that and just having all that prepared, because you want to be able to make strong points and sell yourself to the interviewer while also being able to back up those points and proving that you're not chatting nonsense. On the other hand, if say that this same social media manager job wants someone who's very used to using TikTok, is a TikTok expert, or someone who has experience in front of camera, for example, and these are skills that you don't have, either you don't have them formally, so they're not verifiable, or you've just never used TikTok before, or you've never been in front of camera before. Making a note of these as well, and understanding that an interviewer or someone who's got the person conducting the interview will have looked through your application materials and will likely want to ask about things that you haven't been able to prove that you've said, or things that you haven't mentioned. So this is a classic one of, if you lie on your cover letter or resume, at worst, or at best, if you've made a point that is true, but you haven't really backed it up with evidence, that point is super weak, and an interviewer will ask you about it because they want to know if you've said that you're really good at, if you've got video editing skills, which is something they ask for. They'll want to know how you can prove that you've got video editing skills, because they'll want to bring you in, sit you down in front of a computer and be like, oh, actually, this person can't video edit. Well, that sucks. We've hired the wrong person. They want to know that you're the right person for the job before they give it to you. So you need to show them that everything you say is true so that they can know that you're the right person for the job rather than just guessing. Or if there's something that's completely not on your resume or cover letter, it's probably not going to be a massive deal breaker, because if it was, they probably wouldn't take you to interview. And this is why the interview prep and all of the advice we're giving here is kind of under the assumption that they already think you're semi-competent at very least, because you've got to this stage of the process. And this could be the second stage of the process. This could be like the 7th or 8th stage of the process, depending on the company. They're going to want to know the answer to the question of, okay, we asked for knowledge of TikTok. Do you have that? Because you haven't shown it. And there is no point lying, because again, you'll be found out. But just having a strategy and just having an understanding of, so the two examples I'll give, actually, I think this is the best way of going into it, is let's say you're sitting down in an interview and they ask you, hey, TikTok is something that is important to us. We're trying to grow our platform there. You haven't mentioned it on your cover letter or resume. What is your experience with TikTok? Someone could go, oh, I haven't really used TikTok, but I'd be willing to learn. That's not a very good answer. It's true. It's truthful. So there's a level of like, thank you for being honest, but it doesn't sell you as a good candidate, really. Like, it shows that you're willing to learn. And it could even be a case of, I'm versatile and able to pick up new software quickly, would be like a slight improvement, probably. But again, it's not really saying all that much about you. If you've come in prepared and you've understood they wanted someone who uses TikTok, it's an area of weakness for me. What's the response going to be? Your first response should probably be downloading TikTok and understanding how it works. So at least you can, and this is where you come in and say, when I applied for the job, I didn't have a strong understanding of TikTok, but since finding the app, finding the job posting and applying, I've downloaded the app and I've had a look through, and it's very similar to the skill set that I have. So you can go in and say, look, I'm not an expert at TikTok, but I've got experience making short form, snappy content from my video editing and my Twitter that I've used, because there's a limit on time there. Yes, it's a little longer, but it's a very similar skill set. You can also see from my experience with Instagram that I'm very good at using images and using creative stuff to build a brand and market stuff. So while TikTok would be a newer endeavor for me, I'm confident that I would pick it up very quickly and already have the skills to make it work. That is such a stronger answer. And it's the kind of thing where you only know to prepare that because you've gone through the job description and you understand where your weaknesses lie in the eyes of the job description, right? And this builds onto this next point, so I'm just going to actually tie it in. When you're doing this stuff with the job description, do it with your own application as well. So, spoiler alert, you should have applied with a tailored CV and a tailored cover letter. If you haven't, you're pretty lucky to have got that interview. Congratulations on that. But you want to know exactly what you showcased and what you didn't on your resume, because you want to be able to tie this kind of stuff in. I've got a question going through, so what have we got here? Okay, so if we just had a question through saying, what if I know more than the interviewer does on a certain topic? The answer is you never want to talk down to the interviewer. Never show like you've got a big ego, and never be dismissive of what the interviewer is saying about a platform. So let's say that the interviewer isn't someone on the social media team for this company. It's just their HR person or a recruiting person. And they're talking about Twitter. And they're like, oh, so what's your experience like with Twitter? This is where your achievements in the area are really good, because even if someone doesn't fully understand the ins and outs of using Twitter successfully, they'll understand that if you've grown a platform by 400% in 6 months and you've been gaining so many impressions as a percentage of follower count since you've been there, they'll understand that this is good stuff. They'll understand if you've received plaudits from places for your social media work. They'll understand that you've been able to create successful visual content alongside just writing copy. This is very good because they don't need to understand the platform to understand why you're good for the role. If you want to go into a little bit more detail, so say you're talking about TikTok, you want to talk about how you understand the platform, you can explain it to them to some extent, but it's not a case of you don't need to give them a 101 on TikTok. You just want to show them why you're great at what you do and to give them some examples of that. And again, this interviewer is unlikely to A, give you the job on site, or B, not give you the job on site. And they're probably not going to be the only person to make this decision. They might discuss it with other people. So giving them stuff where they can note down like what you've said and what you've achieved. And again, they'll have your resume, they'll have your cover letter. You should have written all this down before as well, or some of this down before, but you can expand and build on it. That's kind of the best way I would say. So don't try and give them a lesson in your skill set or your expertise, but focus it more on this good stuff in there that you'll understand. And if there's something in the job description that is key, so say you need to be able to create videos that are in the format required for Twitter, you can mention that. You don't have to explain fully to them what that means, but just saying explicitly, look, I can make videos from Twitter. I'm experienced in it. I've been doing it for a while. I understand the dimensions of Twitter videos, how stuff is cropped, and understand the time constraints required to make something snappy on this social media platform. They will understand that that is enough to be going on, right? And you don't need to explain to them how long the videos are or the dimensions of the videos or whatever, because that is, at the end of the day, less relevant to them as someone who doesn't know about those skills. Hopefully that's answered your question. But yeah, remind yourself of your own resume and cover letter as well, just because you want to know what you've already said to them, because this is the baseline knowledge that the interviewer is going in with. And since you've been tailoring each application, you know what's been showcased, you know what they know about you and what they're going to have already been impressed by. And you're going to know which areas haven't been mentioned as much. Because in a job description, if they ask for 15 different skills that are important to them, then you're not going to have written strictly and at length about 15 different skills. And let's say you have 10 of those skills already and you've highlighted 6 of them in your application up to that point. Prepare the other 4 because they might ask you about those things in a, we asked for this skill set, how can you show that you've got it? You want to be able to show that you've got it and it will impress the hiring manager, right? If you've written extensively about your ability on Twitter, they're much less likely to ask you about that because they know that you're successful there. And if you've written a good cover letter paragraph on it, you shouldn't really need to explain yourself because you've already done so. But if you are a decent video editor or decent graphic designer alongside that, but you haven't mentioned that in your cover letter because there was too much other really great stuff that's more specific and more useful in your application, then being ready to show off that stuff is going to be good. And understanding that you're understanding the slightly different way of talking about something that you've showcased already versus something that's brand new, because you might need to go in a little bit more detailed on the stuff that's brand new, give a little bit more evidence to convince the interviewer about your ability to do that stuff. That's going to be a winner. A lot of that stuff will be from the job description where they say something like, nice to have is the classic, because you might not have talked like at length about stuff that's nice to have because you'll have wanted to show off that you can do everything that's required of the role. But in the interview, it's stuff that they're more likely to bring up. So having that all prepared is good. The next point I have here is just always have several questions prepared, but don't worry, we're going to get to that. That's a whole big section on its own. The rest of the stuff here, if you've prepared to showcase everything that you're good at, you've covered yourself for stuff that you're less strong on, and you've done your research on the company and their competition, that's a lot of time you've already spent. That's a lot of great stuff in an interview. And with an interview not being a 4-hour movie, this ain't Avatar, the film, not the anime, although the anime is also pretty long. This is more than enough to discuss, right? And this will cover the bases in a lot of different ways and a lot of different parts of the interview process. Most questions that they will have for you that you can strictly prepare verifiably, this stuff will cover. So you should walk into the interview confident that they're not going to catch you off guard with a standard question on the job that they're applying for, or the company that they are, or the sectors, right? So this is the best place to put your time in terms of preparation outside of questions. But again, we'll get on to that. So then there's the classic, everyone always says this, but I'm going to repeat it because it's important. Know the time of your interview, because I've heard too many stories of people getting the wrong day and missing their interview. Know where the interview is. As we're moving, hopefully, out of lockdown more and more, and as stuff for some companies will go back to a more in-person IRL situation, knowing where your interview is important because you need to know how much time it's going to take you to get there. You always want to be a little bit early for your interview, and you knowing where it is means that you're not walking around central London with your phone in one hand, maybe without signal, trying to find the building that you're going to have a job interview. And yes, that is a story from personal experience. I didn't get that job. And if you've got the ability, basically if you've been told this in advance, knowing the name of the person that you'll be speaking to, that you're going to be seeing, is really, really good as well. Because a classic is you'll be asked when you arrive at a company, especially a large company, why you're there and who you're going to be talking to, like who you're here for, basically. And knowing that information is always good to have. It allows you to do a little bit of research on the person you're talking to as well, just to understand what their role within the company is, kind of a little bit about their career history, and just having a little bit more knowledge on them is going to be nice because it lets you know where they've been, what their skill set is, how long they've been in the company, all of this stuff. And if there's any common ground or anything that you think will particularly impress them. Do you support the same football team? Could be worth noting. Dress. Okay, this one is super important, especially for online stuff. Dress to impress all over. If you're going to a real life job interview, obviously you're not going to be wearing pajama shorts and a shirt and a blazer. If you are, that's brave. I applaud you. You're not getting that job, but like, that's funny. I like it. But if you're in your house, it's very interesting and it's very Not interesting, but it's interesting how many people are just like, I'll just dress the top half fine because that's all that's on webcam. The number of times that I've heard this multiple times from hiring managers, not necessarily in esports, and there was one interview who told me this. They said, occasionally I will ask the candidate if I spot something in their room for them to go grab that thing just to like, so that I can see it, or I like ask them if they can stand up, because it shows if they've actually put in the effort on that whole outfit rather than just the shirt, right? And the classic is, what if the doorbell rings? What if you have to stand up for a moment? What if your fire alarm goes off because someone is cooking in the other room and you need to go deal with it? Like, just putting on trousers or putting on a smart lower half, it doesn't take much effort. And you don't have to, I would say that it probably stops with that. You don't have to put on like smart shoes. That's all fine. You probably don't need to wear socks or anything like that. But just making sure that you're not going to be caught out in like shorts and a shirt, because that looks silly and it shows that you've taken a little bit less care than if you're suited and booted all over. So very low effort thing. 9 times out of 10 doesn't matter, but it's that 1 time out of 10 where it does that you'll have been thankful that you were told to put on the bottom half of your work outfit. And if you're going to an IRL interview, it's never a bad thing to take a physical copy of all your IRL documents. So this is your resume, this is your cover letter, this is a portfolio of your work if you've been asked to provide that, or if this is a job where that would be relevant. Don't print off like 70 pages of art assets or articles, but just picking out like 5 or 6 pages of that stuff. It's good to have. The interviewer will almost certainly have this stuff anyway. But they might not, and it means that you can look through this stuff yourself when you're there, so you can have this stuff prepared and on hand in case you get thrown a little bit of a curveball or you get asked about something on your resume that you can quickly check and see like, oh yes, this is there. Again, it's a very minor thing. It doesn't often come up, and this doesn't need to apply for online stuff, because you'll have a copy of all your stuff saved on your computer, so you can just have that open and scroll through it on your second monitor or on half your primary monitor. But yeah, definitely something it's the little things, it's the little bonuses that take you above your competition or save you in very specific situations. Where they're low effort, you should always consider doing them. Right, little water break here. We're at the halfway mark. Remember, if you've got any questions, hit that general. Our admin is currently browsing through, having a great time. Let me know if there are any questions that need to be answered. Right, so the next thing we're going to talk about, and this is kind of on the prep as well, is questions to prepare for a job interview. When the job interview is going to last however long it lasts. But if at the end, the interviewer is always going to say, do you have any questions for me? And this was I remember this vividly. This was feedback that I got on a couple of occasions where I said no, because I thought I was being smart in terms of I had covered everything in my job interview. I'd been very thorough. I didn't have any questions to ask. I didn't get any of the jobs that I used that tactic on. Should have probably been a giveaway that something was wrong there. Oh, we've got a question. So do we wear our headsets, earbuds during the video call part of the interview? Yes. It's what you're wearing. Like, you need to be able to hear the interviewer, obviously. Always go for sound, like microphone quality. You should always use your best. So unless your headset or your headphones are very intrusive. So the classic one is if you're applying to work as a lawyer, having like the headset with the cat ears on the top, maybe not. Maybe use earbuds for that. But by and large, most gaming headsets or most like earbuds shouldn't be intrusive enough for it to matter. Just use what you're most comfortable with. If you're using something wireless, make sure it's fully charged before going into the interview, because there's nothing worse than losing charge on your stuff and having to scrape around and look for stuff look for a charging cable or look for a set of earbuds during the interview, because it looks like you're not prepared and it's quite unprofessional. So charge up your best gear, use your best gear. Is the how can this job benefit you still a common question? If so, what's a good way to approach it? Okay, so the why do you want this job question, which is kind of similar to that, is still something that is asked. It should be, if you've written a good cover letter, you should have probably answered this question in that cover letter. In fact, there's no probably. You should have answered this question in that cover letter. You could have answered this question in your professional summary in your resume. Whoa, it's all coming together now. The masterclasses, why they're in this order. But you can still be sat down and asked this question. So the stuff you need to prepare for that, and again, this goes back to doing your research on your own application, is what you've said there. Why are you applying for this job? So if you're applying for a social media manager job at an esports organization, why? Why do you want to work at that company? Why do you want to gain this job? And why are you leaving the current situation you're in? So if you're job hunting, you've just graduated from university and you don't have a job, there doesn't need to be a big explanation on that. But if you're moving from if you've left a previous, like your previous role, or you're still in your previous role, but you're looking for new stuff, being able to just mention why you're looking for this job, and why you applied specifically for this one. So for example, you're employed as a social media manager at one organization and you're applying for a community manager role at a different one. Being able to understand and talk about why you're making that change. So you want to be more community focused, and the company, you're a big fan of this company and opportunity in your sector was too good to pass up. These are the kind of things that you need to have prepared for that. It should generally be covered by your preparation beforehand. You should have a very good understanding of that. And if you've read through the job description, you'll know what the company can offer. And a lot of job descriptions have sections that say what's offered by the company. What do you gain from getting this job, right? Choosing a couple of those that really interest you and mentioning those is really good. So say you're like, yep, I'm moving to this role because I've just graduated with this degree. I love the company. I want to work in this sector. This is the kind of role that I definitely want to be in because X, Y, Z. Also, I noticed uniquely that this company has a really great working from home policy and it allows pets in the office. And I've got a little pupper that I like to have with me. Like, that stuff isn't, if you've given a really good strict set of why you want this job before that, humanizing yourself a little bit and like adding that a little bit of personality is great. If you've done your research on the person and see that they also have a dog on their LinkedIn profile, you're set. They're going to be on side with you immediately. Hopefully that's answered your question there. So yeah, it's still a question that's asked, but it's not as, it shouldn't be as scary as a lot of people think it is, because it's just understanding your own situation and being honest about it. How effective have you found practice interviewing with a friend to be? Any tips on getting the best results from such practice? I have not ever personally. I've done practice interviews with people, but I've only ever been the interviewer. I've never done practice interviews with a friend. I feel like I've done a couple with recruiters in the past. The answer being, how much do you, it's what the value is in terms of the person you're working with there. Because if you're just kind of like preparing strict answers, like, so you can't really script your job interview. You could have all this preparation ready, but you then need the person to ask the questions that are going to be asked in the interview. Unless you've been given those beforehand, which is rare, that's basically just going to quiz you on your preparation. So if you're not confident in knowing all your prep, and again, with stuff like company research, you take all that in with you. There's no stigma to being like, yeah, I've got this page of notes about the company and competition. You don't need to learn that stuff. And then the other stuff's about you, which hopefully you'd be able to know. It can be a good confidence thing if you're not someone who's well versed in speaking to other people in a more formal or professional setting. And And if the person who you're chatting to is someone who works in HR or interviewing, that can be really good. But by and large, I don't think it's something that you need to do. It's that on that end is more of a confidence thing, I think. But again, it's not something, if you've got a friend who's willing to sit down and do it with you, that's fine. It's not going to be wasted time. It will still get you a little bit more confident. It might spark a couple of if they ask you a question from a list of classic interview questions that stumps you, it can give you an opportunity to realize, oh, this question's not, I haven't covered this question, I need to go and do that. Or it might give you an opportunity to, when you're thinking about something and practicing through it, where you can be a little bit more actually, let's swing back to this point, and it doesn't need to be as professional. It can help spark some good points that you can then add. But again, that's a case of variance. They have to kind of flip the coin on what questions they practice interview with you, because they can't do hundreds and hundreds, because at that stage you are probably wasting your time. So the value of it is pretty variable. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's something you have to do, but if you've got a friend who's willing to do it with you and you feel more confident having done it, go ahead. If someone asks you to be the interviewer, do it. Be a good friend. Maybe get them to buy you a pint of your preferred beverage in return for helping. On them getting the job, of course, because, no win, no fee and all that. But hopefully that's answered. I'm going to have another sip of water. There's a couple more questions here, and then I will go on to the questions that you should be preparing, and then we'll do a little bit on the techniques during the interview, and then answer a couple more frequently asked questions before we end. Ice water is really good, honestly, it's amazing. Right, so a couple more questions here. If you've got questions, please keep asking them. But after I've done the couple that are on my screen right now, I am going to jump on to the next bit, because we want to keep this as close to an hour as possible. But I promise we'll get to all your questions. If you have no proper clothes on you, what should you do? Buy proper clothes for an interview. You should always have at least one set of, if you're actively looking for a job, you should have at least one set of smart clothes that exist in your vicinity, where you're living currently. If there's, and job interview offers shouldn't be so short term that you're caught without an opportunity to go and buy a shirt, a pair of smart trousers, and a tie, or the equivalent of that if you want to go in a different direction there. You can ask when you get the offer for the interview, it's perfectly reasonable to ask what the dress code is. A lot of times it will be mentioned. But my response to that would strictly be just have that. And if it's a case of, there's a very good point from admin, if it's a point of you cannot afford to own super smart clothes, so a strong suit, explaining the situation to the employer and saying, hey, this is I do not have this attire right now. Doing that before the interview is the solution there. But I would say just having a smart shirt and a tie and a pair of smart trousers should be the answer if you can do so. And if not, explaining to them beforehand and then explaining to them during the interview as well, if it's mentioned, is the best way to cover yourself there. And then the last question we'll answer right now is, what if the interviewer needs to leave and postpone the interview, but it happens the next year? If an interviewer is postponing the interview a year, they probably not the job for you. I'd imagine that's kind of a red flag, either in terms of that company's not particularly well organized, or they don't like you. This is one of the things that we'll talk on a little bit, because this was a question we were asked, is what are the signs of an interview that goes well or goes badly? Them consistently postponing it, or the interview being much shorter than it was advertised to be, big red flag on you're not getting this job. So the answer would be keep applying for other jobs, I guess. Keep it on your radar, because it could be, I mean, unless the interview's happening late December, if it's the next year, something's gone wrong, basically, I guess, in that whole process, and you should probably just look to apply for other stuff. Right. Questions to ask and to prepare for an interview. Do not just prepare one of these questions. You always want to have something to say, but it's a really bad look if the question that you were going to ask has already been answered during the interview. So a classic one, and the first one that we're gonna I will mention as a strong one is, what teams would I be working with most often in this role? It's a nice question because it shows a little bit of understanding of the thing, and you can expand on it yourself and say, what teams am I working with most often? Obviously, this is a social media job, so I'd probably work with your current social media team, but would I be working with the video team? Would I be working with business development on anything on that side? Is there a broader marketing team that is outside of social media I'll be working with? It shows that you have some understanding of the hierarchy of the company and the structure of the company, but also allows you to learn a little bit more about that. So that's a good question to ask. But if that question is answered by the interviewer or comes up in the interview itself, you can't really ask that question afterwards, because then it looks like you haven't been paying attention, which is a very bad way of ending an interview, because this is all this could well be the last interaction you have with the interviewer before you leave. So it needs to be a very positive experience. So asking something that's already been answered is bad. And then being like, oh, well, I don't have anything to ask now because we've answered it all, is again, Will from Hitmarker circa 2018, when I wasn't getting any jobs after interview. So have multiple prepared, and basically just go into it knowing that a couple of these you might lose a couple of questions in the whole interview because they might be answered. There might be a better place to ask these questions in a flow standpoint. So when it's what teams will I be working with most often, they might discuss and you'd be coming in and because we're expanding the social media team and we're working with we've already got this person there, and we've got a new business developer coming in who you'll be working quite closely with. That's a great time to say, oh, that's really interesting that he'll be working with business development as well. Are there any other teams that I'd be working closely with in this role? It's very natural. It shows that you're paying attention. It shows that you're prepared. And it allows for the flow of conversation to be a little bit better, rather than just being cool, and then bringing it up maybe 15 minutes later. But what we'll do here is, but also actually, before I go through the questions that we've kind of earmarked as being particularly good and explaining why we think they're particularly good, you can also be willing to create questions on the fly for the end of the interview. So sometimes in an interview, there won't be an opportunity to ask organic questions. And obviously it's optimal to be able to ask them immediately when they're relevant, but just making a mental note of, they mentioned this, I didn't fully understand it. Or they mentioned this is very interesting, I'd like to learn more. Especially if it's the last couple of questions that I'll ask, so it's still relevant in their mind. You be willing to ask those questions, because it shows that you're listening. It shows that you've taken a keen interest in what they're talking about. Again, if you've got the ability to ask there and then when they are in the topic, do that. But if it's explicitly been said, please leave questions to the end in terms of asking me anything, then that's always something that you can do. So we've earmarked, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We've earmarked 9 questions. This is by no means an exhaustive list, and there are plenty of top 20 interview questions to ask to get that job. There's loads of that out there already. So there will be lists and lists and lists. But these are some of the ones that we look at and we go, these are strong questions to ask, and we're going to tell you why. So obviously, what team would I be working with most often, or what teams would I be working with most often? We've already explained that one. It shows some understanding of the structure, and it lets you learn a bit more, and it shows that you're interested in the company as a whole, not just the role you'd be in. Talking about career progression in the company. So this is if they haven't asked you where do you want to be in 5 years time question, or the where do you see yourself next, where's your progression coming from kind of thing. Asking about this shows that you're thinking not just short term. It shows that you're considering a future within that company. Companies often much prefer for full-time employees to want to be with them for a significant length of time rather than just using this as a stepping stone. And if you've done some research on people in the company who have held the position you're applying for in the past, especially when it's an entry position, and kind of seeing where are they now, what are they doing within the company, if they're still there, if they're not. Or the interviewer that is talking to you, have they developed through the company? Have they had multiple different titles? Asking about this is good because it shows what the development's like. And you can mention, I noticed that there's progression from this entry position into other aspects of the company. What's the expected time frame of that? What's the how long would you consider is the right amount of time in this position? It shows longevity. It shows that you're thinking ahead. This is a unique one for now. This is not something that we'd have talked about 2 years ago. Asking them about what the remote work versus in-office situation is for the company, but only if this hasn't been mentioned. If in the job description someone's talked about this being a fully remote opportunity, you can mention and do some research, see what their situation was before 2020 happened. But it could be a case of them once having an office but no longer doing it. Or it could be a company that had an office, went fully remote, and now is integrating back into an office. And understanding what the balance there is a good one. A, because it helps to discuss in terms of relocation. Because if it's a case of this job is remote right now, but it will move to an in-location thing, knowing that you have to relocate and being able to discuss that is good. If it's something like that, you'd expect them to mention it already, but it's something that is worth noting if it hasn't been mentioned. And it can give you an in to discuss that you're a really good remote worker if that's what they've transitioned into. Day-to-day responsibilities of the role. This is what I've put in here because I think it's a trap. Probably don't ask it. At this stage of the interview, at the end of the interview where they ask any questions, you should know what the day-to-day responsibilities of the role are, either through the job description or the interview itself. If it hasn't come up at this point, something's gone wrong, in my opinion, and the interviewer not having discussed the responsibilities of the role with you before asking you questions is a red flag. Because if it's someone that they're genuinely considering at that stage, they will have discussed the responsibilities. And a job description shouldn't be written without the responsibilities, what would be expected of the employee. So if you're having to ask it, it's usually not a great sign. So it's not something worth preparing, because at that stage, you're more likely to be able to draw them back in with another discussion rather than that mundane one. What will my first week, month, and year look like in the company? Again, it shows you're thinking longer term rather than just what's been written down. It shows that you're understanding that a role can change and shift. And it's a better way of asking about your responsibilities in the first year of your job, because it's a case of asking, hey, what's my first year in the company going to look like? What's the development going to be like in this role for the first year or 2 years or whatever? Because it gives the interviewer an opportunity to talk about things that the company has coming up. This is especially in smaller companies, where it also allows you to mention or flex those not particularly in job responsibility sections of your skill set, but they were mentioned in the job description as something that would be nice to have, and you haven't really been able to talk about it at this point. It's basically I'm applying for social media, but I do video editing thing. Because then you can say, if it's a case of the interviewer saying, look, yeah, we'd love for you to maybe look to expand or move up in a more senior position after a year. Or we'd like to the person in this role to master what they're doing in like the first month, and then look at where else we can put them in the company. It allows you to mention, oh, well, I've actually got this skill set that was mentioned in the job description. And it's just a nice little thing to include. It allows you to naturally insert more information about yourself, which is always good. And And then there are a couple of good ones to ask the interviewer about their own experience. This is especially good when this interviewer has been at the company either a very short time or a very long time. What were your first 6 months with this company like? What was your first year with this company like? It's great if they did the job that you're applying to. That's when it's really, really good. But just understanding what they like about the company, what kept them there, what kind of things they did. It's always great. And people, by and large, like talking about themselves, and getting the interviewer to know them a little bit better is always going to be a positive thing. And again, what's your favorite thing about working for this company? It's a great opportunity for the interviewer to talk about stuff. Again, it allows you to jump on the back of it. If they talk about, my favorite thing about the company is the culture. I think it's a really great place to work, blah, blah, blah. You could be like, oh yeah, I noticed on the job description, this was mentioned as one of the perks of working in. It's really great to know that that's not just something that's been written by whoever wrote the job description. It's something that is genuinely true. And that can be a really nice interaction to have, leaves it on a very positive note. So those kind of things are pretty decent. Again, those are just 2 examples, but anything along those lines. Don't go too in depth. You're not interviewing them, but asking 1 or 2 is always going to be nice. And it's something that is, again, don't ask it if they've already mentioned it in the full interview, but it's something that is less likely to come up. So it's always a kind of a safer bet to have prepared as like kind of a last resort there. A couple more here. What's the onboarding process like? That one goes hand in hand with the working remotely, working from home situation. Just to help understand a little bit more, if it's a fully remote company, how does that onboarding work? If it's a company that's transitioning or in different like stages, it can be it's useful for you to know more than anything. And no hiring manager is ever going to be distasteful of you asking that, because it shows that you're interested in the job. It shows that you're taking care and attention, and that you understand that there is an onboarding process. So always something that's worth asking. And then the final one would be this is the real classic of, what career skills will I hone the most in this role? What are the most important skills for this role? What would you say as an interviewer is required to have, is the number 1 skill to be successful in this role? That's super nice, because it allows you to kind of talk about skills that you've already mentioned and that you've prepared for. And it allows you to see if the hiring manager mentions something there, or the interviewer mentions a skill that you haven't talked about, or you haven't had the opportunity to like bring up. Asking this allows you to have that opportunity to bring it up. And this is something that can save you, because if they're saying the most important skill in the social media manager role is being a good graphic designer for whatever reason, and you've got graphic design skills, but it hasn't come up, it should have come up. But it's a great way of saying, well, actually, that's interesting you say that, because I've taken this Photoshop course recently, and I'm pretty strong in this creative area when it comes to graphic design. So that's always one that I would prepare for, or I would not necessarily prepare for. It's always one I would ask if it hasn't already been covered. But again, this one tends to quite often, I wouldn't say more often than not, but quite often, this will come up in the way that the interviewer talks, and they might even outright say that questions to prepare are, or that these career skills are important. Let's quickly move on, because I know that we are at the hour mark, but I do want to talk very, very briefly on interview techniques and stuff that you should be doing in the interview itself. Because if you're well prepared and you've got a set of questions to ask afterwards, as long as you're not super worried and fumbling over all of your words or doing anything that's super bizarre, you should be okay going into an interview and just talking about the stuff you've prepared, and having the confidence knowing that you've prepared a set of really good questions to ask and that you've got a good understanding of yourself and the company. That should be enough to carry you through it in a decent interview situation. Make sure your phone's turned off and you've got notifications turned off. This includes remote interviews, especially if you're doing it on your main computer where you've got stuff on there that isn't... just make sure everything's turned off. So your Slack notifications, your email, just close all of that stuff down, mute it all, make sure that you're not going to be distracted. Your phone's on silent on the other side of the room, no notifications. It's just professional courtesy, and it means that you're going to be 100% focused on the task at hand. Have a drink with you. Again, have a drink prepared if you're doing a remote interview. It's a bad look if you have to stand up and go and make yourself a glass of water or a cup of tea mid-interview. Don't do that. Again, standing up to get more water. You should be wearing professional lower half, as I've dubbed it. And it's never a bad idea to have a bottle of water with you if you're going to an in-person interview. Most likely the person will offer you a drink. Like they'll say, do you want a glass of water or anything before we start? I always find it's worth taking them up on that, but having a bottle of water with you just in case they don't is very good. And it shows you're prepared, and you'll want a bottle of water if you're going to be talking for a significant length of time, because otherwise it might be a little bit uncomfortable. Go in. This is something that kind of links into clothing, but also into the way that you present yourself. Go in with the company ethos in mind. You will know the company ethos because you'll have done research on the company at every stage of the application process. I say it time and time again. It's super important, people. I hope that I've got this message through to you at this point. Because this will allow you to kind of understand how formal you should be going into it, but always match the style of the job interviewer. Obviously, you can't change your attire when you're in the job interview situation, so that can't change. But if you are expecting a very formal interview with someone, but then they come in, they're very laid back in their posture, they're talking very familiarly with you, be ready to adapt and maybe be a little bit less professional. On the other hand, if you've come into an interview expecting it to be a little bit more casual, in an esports or gaming setting, and they are like fully suited on their end, they're very professional, it's very formal, be ready to up your game a little bit in those regards, because if you're matching their style, then you're going to look like a better fit. You're not going to look someone who's super stuffy if you've gone too formal in terms of how you talk to them, and you're not going to look like someone who's not taking it seriously if they are more professional. And that can sometimes save you if you turn up in a suit and tie to a job interview where the other person's wearing yoga pants and a tank top. Again, real life story from when I was interviewing somewhere. Being able to like match them in terms of like chatting and even occasionally bantering back and forth if they're very casual can save you from looking like you're too stuck up because you've got your top button done up and you've got a tie on. Always be comfortable to ask for clarification or to ask someone to repeat a question. It gives you the opportunity to think if you don't have an answer like immediately prepared. Hopefully you'd have an answer immediately prepared, but it can be good on a curveball. And if you don't understand what they've asked you, always ask for clarification, because it's much better that you do it initially and then can answer their question, rather than kind of understanding what they are asking, so kind of answering the question but not really, because in some situations that will basically just lead you to not answering their question, and they'll be like, oh, this person hasn't answered our question, we'll move on, but that's like a cross on their application. Or best case, they might be like, oh, actually I meant this, after you've answered, at which point you've wasted a bit of time in your job interview, which you don't want to do. So always do that. And this is something that I do constantly, is always, especially in remote interviews, talk a little bit slower than you naturally do in real life. This just means that you're not going to be falling over your words. It's going to be easier for the interviewer to understand what you're saying, and it allows your brain to kind of catch up with your mouth, especially if it's a complicated question. It lets your thought process go point, rather than kind of meandering, because in natural conversation you do tend to meander a little bit more. You can go off on tangents and loop back to stuff. In a job interview where time is limited, it's better to speak a little bit slower and just have stuff a little bit better laid out in your mind. The final thing you have to do, and this should go without saying, I shouldn't need to give this as advice, but I will, be polite to every single person that you meet. Always be polite to people. B, when you are in sight of the building that you're interviewing in, be polite to every single person you see, because You don't know who's walking into that building alongside you. Is it the person interviewing you? Who can say? Most interviewers, if you have to talk to a receptionist or an office administrator or anyone else at the company before going into the interview, if you're being a jerk or aloof or stuck up, they're going to mention it to the interviewer, and you are not getting that job. You can interview perfectly, but if you're a jerk to the receptionist, they're not going to want to work with you as a company. So just be good people. I know that you can all be good people. Just do it. It's fine. It's not a big deal. Right, we've got a bunch of questions coming on through here. So what I would do, if you've got any questions, please, this is your final chance to put them in, because otherwise I'm going to get shouted out for overrunning too much. But we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 5 questions, which is very, very good. The engagement on this talk has been really amazing. Hopefully that means that you're all engaged and interested in the topic, rather than 6, apparently, I can't count, rather than me not selling stuff. Is there a traditional way for someone to get into big esports teams as an employee? Applying for roles with them when they post jobs and gaining experience that will be beneficial to you at best in the job in esports. So if you're looking for a social media management role at a big esports team, let's use Excel, because last time I mentioned them, they created the job that I talked about as an example. So let's say you want to be a social media manager at Excel. Doing a social media manager job at an esports team that's maybe slightly lower is a great way of doing it, because you gain the experience and the knowledge of esports. If you can't do that, being a social media manager in a company not in esports will be beneficial, because it will give you all the skills that you require. Past that, getting general experience in esports is good, but you'd need to do that alongside getting work experience as well, like just general several years of experience stuff. So the short answer is just apply when they post the jobs. There's not really like a cheat code to get a job in esports. If there was a cheat code to get a job in esports and video games, it would probably be common knowledge, and I imagine that Hitmarker wouldn't necessarily need to exist if you could just walk into a big esports team. So fortunately there isn't a cheat code, and it would mean a lot of bad people would be in high positions. How likely can someone from the regular online esports scene convert that experience into an actual profession? It's more likely than you'd think, because it very much depends, because esports can't be your only characteristic, right? So this is something that I hear a lot from students, and I talk to when I'm talking to students about this. So that can either be at college or at university. If I ask you what you want to do, and you say, I want to work in esports, that's not an answer, right? Because you don't just get to work in a sector. It's like saying, I want to work in films. That's not telling me what you want your career to be. So you should have an idea in your mind. You can want to work in esports, but you should also know what you want to do. And the trick here is to say, I say this in a keynote I gave about a month back. Remove esports from the equation, and I say, what do you want your job title to be? What's your ideal job? What do you want to do day to day? And then they'll tell me that, and I'll be like, cool, you want to be a community manager, you want to be a graphic designer, you want to be a video editor. Now you've got this, now you've got that. The esports thing doesn't have to come into it, because esports needs pretty much everything. Like, we see so many jobs in sales and business development and marketing and social media and legal, finance. Esports needs all these people. So it's just a case of being capable in those areas, and then finding that job in esports is how you get there. So the answer is, a regular online esports person can turn it into an actual profession as easily as you can get an actual profession anywhere else. It's just a case of finding the job. And as the esports and video game scene grows, more jobs exist, so you're more likely to find it. But be a good professional first, rather than a good esports person, is my advice. How difficult, easy would you say it is to get into the games industry if you've not worked in the industry before? It's harder than if you've got games experience. But again, this links back to if you've got a great skill set, so if you're looking to get a job as a game developer or a game designer, if you've got experience with software development or designing stuff outside of games, that will still put you in good stead, right? Because if a company's wanting a UX designer for their new video game, they're going to care, and you come in with, say, 4 years of UX design experience for in the financial sector, they're going to be more impressed by that than the person who's got 1 year of UX design at another video game studio, strictly speaking, because you're better at what the job is. So the answer there is, in short, it's very doable. Again, I would go back and watch the masterclass, the first one we did on resume writing, because we talk about how to showcase your skills and your experience outside of esports in an esports application. So definitely worth going away and watching that through again. But yeah, it's very, very doable. It's just a case of knowing how to showcase it. Would you recommend starting from the bottom and working your way up in an esports organization, or working your way in a separate industry and then transitioning over? This kind of ties in. It depends what your situation is and if the job that you want in esports exists currently, right? So for something like, for stuff like finance or legal, or something that's not specific to esports, business development or sales, I guess, would be another one, marketing another one. It's just as good to go out and get that experience elsewhere outside of esports. And spoiler alert, it will probably be easier to find those roles outside of esports, and it will probably be better paid at the junior levels than in esports. And then transitioning into a senior role, because in esports we see loads of people hiring for senior roles and there not being that many senior candidates. At that stage, if they're looking for a head of operations, they'll care more about your 7 years of management operations experience outside of esports than they will for your 2 years in esports. But if you want to get into something that's very specifically esports centric, so like something that only exists in the esports scene, which is rare, like those are rare full-time jobs, you do need to start from the bottom and work your way up. However, on a professional sense, those are the minority. So I'd say if you can find that entry-level job in esports, go for it, grab that job. It will be great and it will set you up very well. But don't be disheartened if you do need to be in a different sector initially, because as you move up, the number of competitors decreases around you, and your opportunity, like the chance of you making a move into esports then at a higher salary, at a higher seniority, is there. So don't be disheartened if you can't get your first job in esports specifically. For jobs where you need to show your portfolio, graphic design, photography, copywriting, is it worth bringing extra copies of your work and leaving copies with them so they can have a good look? Yes, if they need a portfolio, they should have a copy because you'll have sent it with your application. But having a copy as with your resume and cover letter is good. And then you can ask in the interview, do you want me to leave this with you, or do you have a copy already? So the short answer is yes. It's worth doing that, absolutely. Also, this is a small Easter egg for those of you watching. If you're interested in understanding more about portfolios, there'll be some content about how to create a really awesome portfolio out very, very soon. So if you've got questions about portfolio specifically, they might be answered in the next couple of weeks. Would you view it as a negative thing if someone applied for a position, got rejected without making it to the first stage or anything, and then applying later down the line? Wait, so if someone applied for a position, got rejected without making it... oh, no. So basically, this is something that I've talked about a lot outside of Hitmarker. Slight insight, I'm also a freelance esports commentator. That's my, what I do when I'm not doing this. My general advice is there's a lot of shoot your shot culture, and there's a value in that. But if you've got 1 year experience and they're asking for 7, don't apply for that job. You're wasting your time and you're wasting their time. And then if you apply for a job in another year with them, they might remember you and be like, that's the idiot that applied for that senior job without having any experience. But if it's a job that if you look at a job and you think, I would be good in this position, I have some experience, or I'm close to the experience, if it's a 4-year requirement and you've got 3 years, feel free to apply for that job. And failing once does not mean that you shouldn't try again. There are multiple people at Hitmarker, including myself, who didn't get the first job we applied to with Hitmarker. So it's definitely something that's worth doing, I would say. And you shouldn't feel disheartened. The hiring manager's not going to have a vendetta against you. Hopefully, unless your first application was truly awful. But if you followed all the advice in these masterclasses, your application won't be awful. Assuming it was not stated in job posting, what's a proper way to ask about the pay? Okay, we had this question not that long ago. We answered it in our Discord. So if you're not currently a member of our Discord fully, if you're just checking us out for this thing, hang around. We talk about this stuff all the time. It's a great thing to do is to look up the standard pay for someone at your seniority level with the same job title in the country that you're working in, because that will give you a general idea on what salary is standard and what is competitive. It will also give you a guideline on, quite often they'll ask you for your salary expectations at some point before the interview. So that's a great guidance if you're ever asked. But when it's like any questions, you can talk about, there wasn't a salary attached to the job posting and it hasn't been mentioned yet. What can my expected starting salary? What would my expecting starting salary be? And what's the what could I expect in the next year, 3 years, 5 years? Again, that kind of bundles it in with showing longevity, showing you care, and it allows them to, if they want to ask like, what are your salary expectations? That way you can use the knowledge that you've already got and your what you desire, what you need, because never accept a job that hasn't got a salary that you're worth. And it's a way of politely asking it and showing a little bit more than just saying, how much would you pay me, is how I would go about doing it. There was some great advice from multiple different Hitmarker people about this very same question. So at some stage I will go back and I will grab that great advice, but I believe it's pretty similar to what I just said. So hopefully that answers your question. It's always tough. It's always very lame when companies don't post the salary that they're offering. They should, but sadly that's not always the case. Any tips to doing follow-up emails? Should it be simple thank you for the interview, or should you add some follow-up questions, etc. too? I think that sending a follow-up email and thanking them is always great. It's a very personal thing to do. You should do it after every interview. I would leave it like a day or so. My advice in terms of asking follow-up questions and stuff like that is you'd probably have wanted to follow up. You want to ask all those questions in the interview itself, because that's where there's time for that. If you wake up the next morning, you're like, crap, I really want to know this, I think it's fine to ask in that follow-up email, or if there's like a clarification thing you want to ask. But by and large, it shouldn't be a long email that necessarily needs responding to, I think is the best case, because that shows that you've got everything you need from the interview itself. And it means that the hiring manager doesn't need to interact with it too much, because they're already likely very busy. But sending a personal email to the interviewer and thanking them, and often asking them to pass on your thanks to the people you interacted with there as well, is always going to shine you in a good light. Right, so there's a couple more questions we've got. So these are the last questions I'm going to add. If you've got questions at this stage, again, feel free to ask them in general. We won't have time to cover them today, but I will be looking through tomorrow any questions that are still in general, and hopefully the admin will still keep them existing. And then I will make sure to answer them all by text tomorrow at very minimum. So feel free to have these conversations. And of course, in the Hitmarker Discord, we've got an amazing community that loves discussing this kind of stuff. I have 4+ years in esports event management, but we don't have much jobs here in Pakistan, And usually in our region, I have interviews with this week for remote jobs for a company operating in Germany. Can you share some tips for doing good in an interview when applying for an international company? Yes. So the question here is, you need to fully understand what the relocation / remote working situation is here. So that needs to be a question you ask. Because if you're not legally able to work in Germany, then the job does need to be remote for you. If you've got an interview, then hopefully that's already come across and they will understand that you're an actual candidate who can work there. But sometimes they don't, because it happens more than you'd think. Again, stories from Will's past. But I wouldn't necessarily say that there's too much specific prep you need to do for international stuff. Understanding the work culture in a different country is always good, and just to see how things differ from where you currently work or the sector that you're currently in, because that allows you to kind of align your understanding so you're not caught off guard by stuff that they could potentially say. But also it allows you to maybe answer in the interview something like, I understand that this is how you work here. I worked in Pakistan for 4 years in event production, and I found that this is really cool, and I haven't noticed it being prevalent in different countries. So this could be something that we could look at doing in the role, because it's something that they won't have heard from other candidates likely. So that can make you stand out, and that's a really good point. The last one would be, if you're non-native to the language that you'll be interviewing in, again, obviously you'll speak the language, because otherwise you wouldn't have got the interview and you wouldn't get the job. But sometimes just slow it down just a little bit to make sure that you're being very clear with how you're interacting with the other person for your non-native language. Is it a hindrance being an international applicant for a job opening, even though you go to a US university? Anything to prepare for? Understanding when you go into it, the situation in terms of visas or permits or whatever you need, the legality of you working for that company. I think if you've got the legal requirements to work at a company in the location that you're working or that you're applying for. So if you're an international student in the US and you're applying for roles in the US, if you're going to be legally able to work in the US after graduation, there should be absolutely no problem in terms of applying for that job or interviewing in that job. Relocation would be something that you'd have to consider, but if you're studying in the US and you're planning on staying there afterwards, that shouldn't be an issue. If there's a legal issue or they need to have you get a visa or a permit or something like that, then it can be more problematic. It's the same with the point about international job interviews, where you just need to understand the situation going in. But if you've got to interview, this should have probably already been covered at some stage in the process. So the answer is, if you're at an interview, it shouldn't be a hindrance unless someone hasn't done their due diligence in the past. And if you're legally able to work somewhere and it is a hindrance that you're international, you don't want to work at that company. Simple as. They shouldn't care where you're from. They should care how good a candidate you are. And then last question. Sometimes I apply for jobs which I have too much experience for. Example, if they are looking for 1 year experience and I apply with 4 years, is it good to apply for such positions? As mentioned above, pay scale for international level internationally beats senior level pay scale where I live. The short answer is no, you're selling yourself short. Because while a junior level role might pay better than a senior level role where you live, if you're able to work that junior level role in a different country, you've got 4 years experience, you're an intermediate candidate, you're near senior level. Assuming that you have good experience in that sector, you should be applying for intermediate jobs. It's also one of those things where we don't love seeing this, because it means that it's the classic of intermediate candidates applying for entry-level roles is why entry-level candidates can't find jobs, because obviously your 4 years is better than someone with 0 years. Look at how much experience you have and try and apply for roles that ask for that kind of level. You can go a little bit above, you can go a little bit below. If you've got 4 years experience and you see your dream job at 2 years, obviously apply for it. But it's kind of don't go for an entry level job if you're a senior candidate, because you're selling yourself short. You're not going to be paid what you're worth. You're not going to be doing stuff that fulfills you, and you're hindering the growth of other candidates because they're not going to be able to beat you in that kind of position on experience, and then they're going to struggle to get into the industry. And if you apply for a job with like 1 year experience and you've got 4 years, and you're not getting that job, that can be pretty tough. And that's the case of then, if that's the situation you're in, looking at your applications and understanding why you're potentially not getting the callbacks of those jobs where you should definitely be getting them, is always worth doing. Cool. So that is all we've got time for. In fact, that is all we've got overrunning by 25 minutes time for. But very quickly, massive thank you for everyone for asking the questions. There were a lot of really great ones in this time. We are looking to, much in the same way that we had our resume and cover letter articles on the site, we are looking at creating a job interview one, and we will be looking through these questions when we write that to ensure that all of these are answered. As hopefully you'll have all seen by now, our first 2 masterclasses have been uploaded to YouTube in their entirety, and we're uploading our favorite sound bites to our social media account over on Twitter. So you make sure to go follow our social media account on Twitter and subscribe to our YouTube. But this one will be joining them as soon as we've got it all cut up and sounding good for you people. So that will be there. Keep your eyes on the Discord and on our Twitter, because we'll let you know when you can come back and listen to this at your leisure. Again, massive thank you to everyone who's asked me such great questions. Hopefully you found all this useful, and we will be back with our final masterclass of this first series, season 1. I don't know if we're going to renew it for season 2. If you want a season 2 where we talk about a couple of different topics, then make sure to let us know on Discord and on Twitter, because then I might be able to convince people to allow me to have a season 2. Or if we're going to do something different. But that one will be in more than 2 weeks because of a couple of other things that we have in the works right now. So keep your eyes peeled on socials for that. But that final masterclass is going to be a joint thing of how you use Hitmarker the best, all of our insider secrets on the platform to make sure that you're getting the best experience and you're finding all the best jobs. And that one's also going to be a more general Q&A. So if you have any questions about esports and gaming jobs and anything about the application process, that'll be the best place to ask it, and we will be giving you we'll be putting aside a lot of that talk to answer your burning questions. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, keep your eyes on our social media and our Discord, and we will be announcing the exact date for that as and when we know when that will be, but it's likely to be in 3 weeks time, I believe. But massive thank you again for joining us. That is all we've got time for today. But check out hitmarker.net for all your esports and gaming job needs. Social media at Hitmarker Jobs. You're already here in the Discord. If you're watching the VOD, check out our Discord. There's a link on our social media. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you in our next event.